Okay. All right. So this is the SSVF Rapid Rehousing Homeless Prevention Review. First few things I'm going to go over are some general landscape items with caseworthy and point out some HUD-related requirements and nuances, and then also talk about different features that are available to you as a user in caseworthy. So the first thing I want to talk about is the concept of enrollment versus household, well, member enrollment versus household enrollment. So that's this first bullet here. The program enrollment is generally what you see when you find your client, click project enrollment, and then it's going to take you to the enrollments associated with that person. In reality, what you're seeing, as soon as the screen catches up, is you're seeing the household enrollment here. So for example, if you're dealing with a family where you have more than one person in the household, this is generally the household enrollment that is initiated when the head of household is enrolled into the project, okay? And then you have other members of the household, and other members of the household may have a different start date than the head of household. So what you're seeing here in this example, for this client, and the household enrollment is 8/1/2018, and I'm under my head of household here. As you can see, there's two other members, but right now I'm under the head of household record. The household record or enrollment start date is 8/1/2018. If you click the gear and click member, that's going to take you to the list of the members associated with this enrollment. As you can see, only two of them are the head of household and the child. The grandparent isn't. The grandparent is not part of this enrollment, which is fine. That's perfectly allowable. Essentially what you're seeing is that these two members have a enrollment start date of 8/1/2018. So they enrolled together. But there are circumstances, and I'm sure you've encountered this, where the child may have enrolled at a different date, which is fine as long as it's equal to or after the head of household start date. So this date could be any time after 8/1/2018. But the reason why I point out the household enrollment versus the member enrollment, especially when dealing with households of more than one person, is very often you're working on a client record. So you'll come to the child's record. I'm going to switch over to the child here. And you'll go to the project enrollment, and you'll see that the enrollment start date is 8/1/2018. And you think to yourself, well, wait a minute, the child didn't start 8/1/2018. The child started October 1, 2018. So this isn't right. How do I fix this? What you're seeing here, even though you're in the child record, you're at the household level. So you're seeing the date the household started. If you want to see the actual date that you put in for the child start date, you would want to check the member enrollment date. And again, it's important because when you have family members who don't start at the same time of the household, it can be confusing when you just look at that household, that top layer, you think that something's wrong. The other way you think that something might be wrong is when you've exited somebody but left the head of household behind. So if we've exited this child, for example, if you go to the child record, this is going to say enrolled, and this is going to have a start date, and it's going to say open. And you're going to say to yourself, wait a minute, I exited that child. And you may have done so. You exited them from the household. But again, we're at the household level. So if you wanted to see the actual start and end date for the child, you would go into the member record, and then you would see this child, and then you would see a start date and an end date here, okay? Just wanted to make that distinction, because the more and more you start to work with caseworthy, the more and more you're going to have these circumstances, and they can become confusing when you're starting to evaluate data. So if you're running a report and the report says, you have 5 people in your project and 2 of them have left and they happen to be in a family, and you go and look in that family record and it's not looking the way you think it should, and it's because you're looking at the household level versus the individual member level, okay?
Well, what if yep. we have enrolled a family and that is not the norm for us? We enter them and exit them according to the head of household.
That's fine. You can do that. I'm just letting you know that if you have a member who leaves while the rest of the household stays, and you want to know what the start and end date is for that person, you won't see it at the top level. You'll see the household is still enrolled, and you would have to actually go into the member record to see the actual start and end date of that member.
Okay.
But if everybody leaves at the same time, when you do the exit, you'll exit them all at the same time.
Okay. I have a quick question for you, Jim.
Sure.
I've experienced this, but whenever I'm uploading to the repository,
yep,
I'm always kicked out. And this was like when this is an old client, and when we came over to Caseworthy, I still have problems with this one family. Mm-hmm. The mother came in. I have the correct date, but yep, it'll still kick me out, and I'm being for that. Even though my dates are correct for her, the household date is correct, but still it's an error with her. Would that just be because of the time that it migrated over?
It's hard to say. We would have to look at the actual record and the actual error message from the repository. Because when you upload to the repository, it'll usually tell you, either a client ID or which file or which table.
And it's always the enrollment for her.
Okay. And so
same thing. We go in, we fix it, but it still happens.
Yeah. So we'll look at that. That'll be something that we can look at the end, where we can actually pull up her record and see what the repository might not like about her enrollment.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So again, program enrollment versus household enrollment. Then we're going to talk a little bit about adult-only data and all-member data. And this is a subject that, since I've started assisting Mark and the users in Kansas City, that there's been some differences of understanding of what HUD considers all-member data versus what they consider to be adult-only data. So adult-only data, when you're doing data entry, whether you're doing an enrollment or whether you're doing an annual assessment or an exit, there's certain data elements that are just for people 18 and over, and there's certain data elements that are for everybody in the household, regardless of age. So I'm going to go into the HUD assessment dashboard. And the first thing we're going to look at is the HUD universal assessment. And so I'm in my head of household record. And if I look at the entry, the HUD universal at entry for the adult head of household, okay, there's a series of questions here that are specific to just adult members. Disabling condition is for everyone, everybody from the child under the age of 18 all the way over and beyond 18. Everybody gets asked that question. But the adult members only get asked the chronic homeless evaluation questions. So type of residence, length of stay, things like that. All right. So that would be considered an adult level only question versus the disabling condition. The next set of questions in the HUD program assessment, we'll go to an entry assessment. Okay, so domestic violence is adult only. Anybody under the age of 18, unless you're operating a runaway homeless youth project where your head of household is under 18. If you don't have that circumstance, then you're only going to see this question for somebody 18 and over. Non-cash benefits, that's an adult-only question as well. The child record does not get assessed for non-cash benefits. Covered by health insurance is an all-client question. And then disabling conditions are an all-client series of questions, okay? Then the last assessment we'll look at, or the last two, are HUD health insurance, which is an all-client, where you have to identify the insurance type. It's HUD health insurance, pretty straightforward. But more importantly, the HUD financial assessment, because this one usually always sparks some conversation. So the HUD financial assessment, though it may open during your program enrollment, you should, if the child or if the member is under the age of 18, your income from any source should be no, and you should be saving no income. You should not supply an income in a child record for when you're doing the enrollment. Let's assume that in the case where the child is disabled and is receiving a disability check, that dollar amount and source would be associated with the head of household's record. So when you do the enrollment, you would put SSI for the child, $600. And if the parent was employed, then you would say the next thing you would do is employed and however much the parent is making. You would not put the income with the child record. It would all go in the head of household. Now, if the child were to leave the household and the head of household would stay, you would simply just reduce in the next assessment for that client, you would just reduce the income for the head of household by the amount that went with the child when they left. Okay?
So if there's like a 17-year-old that's working, that revenue still wouldn't put that under their, like the 17-year-old's income from the head of household?
Well, you generally wouldn't assess or use, I guess you could, but it's not required that if the 17-year-old is employed, you wouldn't essentially assess that if you were doing like a rental calculation, I get for that matter. But if it's somebody under the age of 18, you are not required to put their income information under their record. If you want to add it to the head of household record just to capture the total household income, that's perfectly fine. But essentially what HUD says is they don't assess the income on somebody under the age of 18. So if you want to track it, I would put it with the head of household.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so the other area we're going to talk about, we're going to look at annual assessments a little bit later because honestly, the rapid rehousing projects, the majority of you are only following a client for about a year or so. Homeless prevention is usually, again, a short-term intervention. SSVF is a little bit longer term, so you may run into annual assessments. But I'll talk about them in a little bit more detail later. But I want to talk more about data congruence between health insurance and disabling conditions. What we talk about with data congruence, we're going to look at the HUD Universal again, and we're going to go to an entry record. So disabling condition is yes. If you say yes to disabling condition, you also have to have a yes for at least one disability type in the HUD program assessment. And I'm going to go to a HUD program assessment. So we said disabling condition equaled yes, then one of these must be a yes. All right. You cannot have a yes in disabling condition and have all these as no. That would be data incongruence, and you can run into a report error for that category. And the other thing to also look at is when you talk about the mental health category for a minute, and you say yes to mental health, I've seen circumstances where expected to be of long and continued and indefinite duration and impairing ability to live independently. In some cases, I've seen no here. And you have to, the client may say no to that they're, that it's not impairing their ability to live independently, or it's not going to be of indefinite duration. But if the reality is that they would be homeless were it not for your project, and the main root cause of their inability to live independently is because of their mental health status, it doesn't allow them to have gainful employment or enough employment to live independently, then your response to this question should be yes. Again, the client might respond differently to that, but if you explore that with the client a little bit, you can get to the root of that particular question. So it's just important to think about that one with the client, and then also try to ascertain the most accurate information possible when you're evaluating the sub-questions that come up when you respond yes to any one of these project types, or the disability type. Any questions about that?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Then the next layer is, I should jump back into there, is the health insurance and the HUD program assessment. Health insurance, covered by health insurance, yes. That means then you have to have a health insurance type in the assessment. So when you go to the HUD health insurance assessment, after you say yes in HUD program, you may have to make sure you select Medicaid, Medicare, private or state, or whichever other insurance type the client may have. Again, there are circumstances where we see it's yes for health insurance, but then when we look at the entry assessment, these are all no, for example. So you want to make sure that there's balance there, because that will impact data quality reporting. Okay. Chronic homeless calculation for, in general, rapid rehousing, it's, what's your chronic homeless requirements? Are you serving chronic homeless, or are any of you, I don't think we had many rapid rehousing. Yeah, we didn't have any rapid rehousing today. So SSVF, chronic homeless, what's your chronic homeless counts like as far as your populations go?
Is this where you have the AMI?
No, the AMI would be the for evaluating the income and essentially what level of what the poverty level is on the HUD program assessment for SSVF. I'm referring to is the HUD universal assessment, the chronic homeless calculation, which is here. So essentially, what it does is it evaluates the client's data based on what you provide to determine if they meet the standard for chronically homeless. So in order to be chronically homeless, or to identify as chronically homeless, the person, number one, has to have a disabling condition of yes. Their prior residence has to be a homeless situation, emergency shelter, place not meant for habitation. The length of stay has to be at least a year or longer. They have to have the 4 more times in 3 years and or more than 12 months of consecutive homelessness. So it's just important to note that once you fill in that information and you save your assessment, you're going to get a chronic homeless value. And in this case, based on the way the record was responded to, this person is chronically homeless. Their chronic homeless value is yes. And I only point that out because it does give you a quick review if after you've created the client record and you need to see if this person is occupying a chronically homeless bed, that you have identified them as chronically homeless. Again, not as, yep, go ahead.
To answer your question, it's around 60-70%.
For which project type?
Well, you asked a question, SSVF, rapid rehousing, what do you think, you asked that question? I just didn't get a chance.
Mm-hmm.
So 60 to 70%.
Okay. Homeless prevention, you probably won't run into it too much, but yeah, rapid rehousing you can, and SSVF you can. So as long as you have a benchmark, if there is a community benchmark of, once a rapid rehousing voucher or SSVF voucher becomes available, what's your turnover percentage to support chronically homeless veterans or chronically homeless with that voucher. So yeah, so as long as you all are on par with or understand what your community is looking for, then that's a way you can evaluate it. And we can also look at the APR, because the APR does give you a count of chronically homeless that are being served at your project. Well, let me put it this way. It gives you a count of what the system thinks your chronic homeless population is for your project. Right. The next area I want to look at is enrollment ID and family ID and the whole multiple families concept in that HUD allows for and that caseworthy accommodates. We're going to go back to the project enrollment screen. And for any enrollment, you have family. I have a family column here, and it gives you a family name. All right, so the family name is essentially the name of the family that the individual or other members are enrolled under or with. That's who they came into the project with. Now, it's possible for a client to be part of more than one family. At one time, they could have been enrolled, the client could have been enrolled with 3 family members and then left that household and either went off on their own and lived as an individual in another project, or became part of another family somewhere along the way. So it's perfectly allowable for that to happen. So what you might see here in the top left when you click on the person icon, so let's just talk about the 3 people showing here. Number one, if you click on this and you look and see this grandparent and say, wait a minute, I didn't enroll that grandparent. Well, that's true, you might not have, and it's not impacting your data to see a member here that is not part of your program. This is just telling you how many people are associated with this particular family in the system. What dictates who is in your program is the program enrollment itself. So for example, if this family were enrolled in this program here, I would only be worried about who are the members who have this enrollment. So if I go look at the grandparent, I'll switch to their record and I'll go look at project enrollment. You see there's no enrollments here. So the grandparent is not impacting my data at all because they do not have an enrollment in my program. All right, so you don't have to do anything with them. You don't have to remove them. You don't have to request that they be removed because it may have been at one time they were legitimately attached to that family. Now, if you know they are no longer attached to that family, then that's a different story, and you can submit an email and we'll help show you how to remove that person from the household. But don't, a lot of times people freak out a little bit when they click up here and they see other people here that they're not expecting to see. Again, it's not saying that that person is part of your program. It just says that they're part of this family. All right. So now let's go and see how you would identify the family members and or how many families exist for a particular client. If you click on case management and go to family and contacts, this will show you however many families a particular client is associated with. In this case, just one family name appears up here. But there could be a circumstance where there's another family name as well. What you really need to be concerned with is which family is enrolled in your program. And that's where the family name comes in handy because each family name is unique. So in this case, my family name is Test 1972-1003. If this person had another family that they were a part of, there'd be another row here with a different family name. So if you're not sure, you can always look at the family name, go back to case management and program enrollment, and then you can see which family is associated with your enrollment as soon as the screen catches up. And you can see here this is telling me that my client is enrolled in this program under this family name, okay? So if we go back to family and contacts, you can actually see who's a part of that family. And you can either click here or you can actually click on the word family. And then from here, you can click the gear and click edit. And now you're going to see the family members listed out. And again, this doesn't mean that they're all enrolled in your program. This just means that they're all associated as a family in the system. What I've seen people try to do is they try to get rid of members or they try to get rid of entire families that they think are incorrect in the system. I ask you not to do that because that will cause a lot of problems. It's going to cause a little bit of a ripple effect across the system because even though you might not have created that family and those members, another agency may have. And now that you're part of an open system, everything you do to the record will essentially either be seen or removed from view from somebody else down the line who works with that household. So if you think somebody is incorrect here, do not end their membership with their family by putting in an end date. If you put in an end date here, you will essentially remove that family member from view and you will remove their enrollment history from view. So you don't want to do that. If you ever find somebody you think is incorrect, always submit an email asking for assistance from either Nutmeg or Mark on how to clean up a family that you think is incorrect, okay? Because the last thing you want to do is disconnect a family member or disconnect an enrollment because you've ended a family in the system. All right. The next thing I want to point you to is the enrollment ID. The enrollment ID is unique for each enrollment for the household. So it's important to know this number. It's different than the client ID. The client ID is the client's individual ID in the system. And then for that client, they have their series of enrollments, and each of those enrollments has an ID that's listed here. It's very important that you not delete an enrollment. Even though you have the power to do so off the gear here, it's vital that you resist doing that in the efforts of cleaning up data. When you delete an enrollment, you actually orphan the assessments because you can't delete the assessments. So you leave the assessments behind. And by leaving them behind, you leave them available for the reports. So you might have deleted an enrollment where you made a mistake, but the bad assessment is still visible. And you'll have to reach out and get help from us because you're going to try to fix it and you won't be able to fix it and we'll actually have to do a hard delete of the assessments so they don't impact your reports. So if you have an assessment or an enrollment that you think needs to be deleted, the best way to communicate that is to say, for client ID 641648, enrollment ID, I'll get highlighted there, 2936958. Please remove it's incorrect or it's an error. And then we can assess it. Myself or somebody from Mark, we can evaluate it and determine if, yes, this is truly what you want to have happen. Because very often, you may think you want this enrollment deleted, but that might not be the case. It might be that you want to, there's another enrollment here that has better data or more complete data, and that's the one that should be deleted and or kept, and this is the one that should be deleted. Because the one thing you can't see in the assessments, you can't see which enrollment the assessment is tied to. So if you have two enrollments, one you want to get rid of, one you want to keep, we'll help you evaluate that. The other thing I want to point to is up in the top right corner is a teardrop. When you click on that teardrop, there's a recycle bin. If you click on the recycle bin, any enrollment that's been deleted for a particular client would be here in the recycle bin, and you can actually restore that. There's a little checkbox next to it if there were any here. Then you would click restore, and that would bring the enrollment back, reconnect it to any assessments, and you'd be all set. You would have fixed your problem if you accidentally deleted something. So I just bring your attention to that. It doesn't have the same drop-down options in every screen. Each screen, the teardrop is somewhat unique to what you can do. You can usually print from here. You can export from Excel or to Excel from here. But in this case, for the program enrollment screen, one of the big items is the recycle bin. All right. The next thing you may see in a client enrollment is this assessment pending. That's not a problem. It just means that the assessment or enrollment was never completed on the client or on the family. And the nice thing is, if you just click the words assessment pending, you can complete the words complete entry assessment, and it actually takes you to the screen of the enrollment where the last person left off. All right, so you'll have the last set of completed data, and you can save that and move to the next screen and then carry on with the enrollment, and the household or individual, you'll be able to finish the enrollment with no issue, okay? So if you see assessment pending, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that it needs to be completed. Any questions on that before we move along?
No.
Okay.
The information you shared would apply for agencies with multiple programs and too, right? Everything you just shared.
Say that one more time.
If you work for an agency with multiple programs from different programs, it would be the same, right? The information you just shared. Like if I saw something in my agency, like let's just say I have a veteran that's in our shelter, he would have an enrollment in that program, but also within our agency. That's the same information you just shared, right? Like you would see, you get what I'm saying?
I'm going to try to see if I can restate and mean the same thing. So if a client has a program enrollment with your agency name and program name, or with a program name here, then they're enrolled in your program. A single client can have multiple enrollments with your agency and with other agencies. You're going to see all of that information in the program enrollment screen. So a client won't necessarily just have an enrollment in your program. They could have enrollment histories with other programs that you can see.
Okay.
Is that what you're somewhat stating, or is there something other else that I'm missing?
I believe that's what yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so if you want, let's do this. I'm going to show you probably a little more clearly here when I look at the enrollment. So this client, this test client, is in this rapid rehousing project under this provider name, and you all know the provider names are up on the right-hand side here, and then under the Journey to New Life organization. So that tells you where that particular enrollment, on what agency that particular enrollment belongs to. If I look at the Kim Wilson Housing enrollment, for example, which is one of the other enrollments that this test client's a part of, as soon as it reloads. So we can go here, hit edit, and look at that enrollment. So you can see the program at KWH that they're a part of, Well, in this case, this is one of the dynamics with the system where Mark has some providers and orgs associated with enrollments. But the correct way that this would show is you would have the Kim Wilson Housing provider and org would be Kim Wilson Housing. All right. So that would mean that that client's data is part of Kim Wilson Housing data. So anybody at any agency that looks up this test client would be able to see what program enrollments that client's had and what assessments that client's had. It's an open system. You've moved from MacLink, which was more of a siloed system, meaning you didn't see anybody else's stuff unless there was a particular agreement that you had with them. You just saw your client's enrollment with your agency and your client's data with your agency, and that was it. Now you're in an open system where there's a share across the system, so you can see not only your agency data for that client, but also other agency data for that client. Okay. So another question that's come up a couple of times is how to add a member to an existing enrollment and how to exit a member who leaves a household, but everybody else stays. So we're going to kind of walk through those couple little steps just so you have an idea of where that happens and how that happens. So let's say you completed a program enrollment, and after you complete the program enrollment, you realize, I forgot to add a child to the household. And what do I do? Well, the nice thing is you don't have to get rid of everything you've done. You just have to add that member to this household and to this enrollment. And to do that, you just have to follow the steps that I have here. Okay, so it's case management on the left side, then family and contacts, then you click family, you'll click the gear, and then add and enroll family member. So I'm going to go through that step with you. We're going to click case management, family and contacts, family, and then the gear, and add and enroll family member. This will launch the workflow, no different than you would do in a program enrollment. And all you need to do is now add that member you forgot to add. You don't have to redo the whole family. You just put in child, first and last name if it was a child, check for duplicates, system will find them, you select them, and all their available data will move over, and then you go through the assessments, and that child will be added to the family and added to the enrollment. Okay?
Are you guys gonna give us these slide sheets?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Everything's yep. So the other thing is when you're in an enrollment, and we're going to talk about this too when we do one, but up in the top right during a program enrollment, there's a teardrop. Okay? So anytime you have to kill an enrollment, meaning you didn't mean to start it, it was a mistake, you want to get out of it, you're going to click the teardrop and click exit workflow. You want to resist, you want to resist this cancel, and you want to resist the red X at the top. You want to go this way with exit workflow. Also, let's say you're starting the enrollment and you realize you don't have all the information you need to finish it. You're missing your assessment, your paper copy is missing a page or whatever it might be, and you're not going to be able to finish it. It's 5:01 and you don't work past 5 o'clock ever because you guys aren't busy. You have nothing left to do with your day. You just want to go home, right? No, and obviously we know that's not true. So it's, if for whatever reason you don't have all the data you need, you can click here and you can click Save Progress and Close, and that will put the assessment in that pending status that we saw earlier, where it'll show assessment pending, and you can come back to it, the next day when you have all the information. Okay, but in this case, I want to exit the workflow because I'm not going to finish it here. Exit the workflow, it just brings you right back to where you were in the head of households record of that household where you're going to add that extra person. Okay.
Wait, so I have a question.
Yeah.
Just to reiterate, so when you add somebody, what's my question? Okay, so when everything that you just showed us, is that to add someone to that household, or was that to add someone to the family project enrollment? It's
both. So you're going to be adding them to that. They're going to be attached to that family and that enrollment.
And you click on family members or the project enrollment? Sorry.
So case management, family and contacts. And then as soon as family opens, you click on family, that name there. and then the gear, and add and enroll family member.
See that, Brianna?
Okay.
All right.
Hold on. All right. You got it?
But what if the person, if a kid or an ex-spouse or somebody, they're already in the system, but you just need to attach them to to the household?
Well, that would be fine too. It would be the same rule. It's the same thing. You're going to look for somebody in this. This doesn't mean that the person doesn't exist in HMIS. It just means you don't see them here, and they're not part of the enrollment in your project.
Because it will ask to look them up once you go there.
Yes. Yeah. So you'll go to. So let's say you do see the person here, okay, but you don't see them in the enrollment like we have for this grandparent.
Mm-hmm.
So you can have somebody who's part of a family already, so you added them to the family or somebody added them to the family, but they're not in your program enrollment. For that circumstance, it would be in the head of household record, and then project enrollment. And then you would go to the enrollment where you want to add them, and you would click on member. And this is where you would get your member list, and you could essentially then edit members here. And then the grandparent record is right here. You would just have to click on it, and you could add that grandparent to the enrollment. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry, you can add that grandparent. Well, that'll attach the enrollment to the grandparent's record. You'll still have to do the assessments, but this will essentially add them to the enrollment. So you'll see the program enrollment with the grandparent. That's if you already have them up here on the left side. Okay. But then you would have to go and manually do the assessments, the entry assessments for that grandparent. If you have a circumstance like that, though, I would, request some assistance via ticket or via an email, and somebody can walk through that with you to make sure that you have all the assessments that, get all the assessments done that you need to get done.
I have a question. So
Yeah.
Once you add that grandparent in there, then if you go over to services and go into that screen or that workflow, then you can go ahead and add services for that grandparent.
Once somebody's enrolled in a project, they're going to have access, their enrollment will have access to whatever's required for that enrollment. So if services are part of that enrollment, or if services need to be available for that client record, you'll always see what those services are for that particular enrollment. So if I need to add a service, you can see that you always have the project drop down. And if a person had an open enrollment in that project, you would add the project there. Let me go to the head of household record for that. No, I'm not. I might not have any services set up for this test project, so for the test client. But if for an active client, you would see this enrollment. If this enrollment had services attached to it, or services that needed to be attached or used for that particular client, you would see it in the services screen, and you would have to select the enrollment or the project from that drop down, and then the appropriate services would list out, whether it's for a PATH project or rapid rehousing or SSVF, whatever it might be.
And the reason why I ask is just because I had a situation where there was a family already created. And so I went in there and I had to enroll usually I go, and maybe I'm just doing it wrong. I went and enrolled because each person has to be enrolled in the program separately, because I do street outreach. And so then when I went in, usually I've never had a problem with clients when I'm working with families who have to be enrolled, because I meet with them sometimes on separate situations and need to report those services. But with the female in the household, when I went in and tried to add her to street outreach separately, it kept telling me that her family was already in the program. But then, of course, when I went through services and projects and all that stuff, and like that screen where you go and you click down and you try to collect which program they're in to go ahead and put the services in, it kept showing that she wasn't enrolled in any sort of program. But again, every single time I tried to go in, it kept giving me an error. So
you probably have
I thought the wrong route.
Yeah, my guess would be that there's a deleted enrollment somewhere, or the person was a part of 2 families at one point and something got deleted. So we would have to look at the actual record to see why the system is reading that person is already enrolled. Then also, when you add a service, the program will only drop down in the project list if the enrollment is open. You can't add a service to somebody who's been exited. That's the other wrinkle, that the enrollment has to still be open in order to do that.
So that just might have just been a one case basis, because like I said, I've never really had that problem with any other case, but I thought maybe I just wasn't doing it wrong.
Yeah, and if you know the client, we can look at it after we're done too. That would be a fairly, hopefully, routine one to assess. Okay. Any other questions on adding somebody to the family and the enrollment?
No.
Okay. The next one is obviously somebody who leaves. So somebody's leaving the household because either they've aged out or found somewhere else to live, or it's a couple and they've broken up. So somebody's leaving. So the sequence, you go to the program enrollment, click the gear, click the word member, click on the actual member's name, and then click on complete exit assessment. So we're going to click the gear, click member, and everybody who's a member of the household should show in the list. Anybody with an active enrollment should show. So if you notice, the grandparent's not here because we never added them to the enrollment. And let's say the child is leaving, you would click on the child's name and then complete exit assessment. That will launch the exit assessment workflow, show you all the questions you need to answer. You answer them. It'll then exit the client from the household. And you'll still see the client up here on the left side. And you'll still see that when you click on the client's record, you'll still see this scenario. But when you go to the member record of that particular client, that's where you'll see exit date. This is where you'll show the date the client left. Okay. All right. We don't need to get into that. All right. So,
what was ESG? Go back. That is something we do.
No, this is for emergency shelter.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Emergency shelter. ESG. Yes. This is for night-by-night shelters.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we have to talk a little bit about the project start date versus housing move-in date for PH projects as well as rapid rehousing projects. So SSVF falls under the PH menu, and some of you are probably already acquainted with it. But for rapid rehousing or SSVF for that matter, you have the one-time field. Let me, you know what we'll do? Let's do before we jump into that, I'm going to do an SSVF enrollment. We'll start with that, and then we'll look at, since the majority of you are, there's a mix of, we've got a couple SSVF. Homeless prevention, you don't have to worry about the one-time field, which is nice. But SSVF, are you familiar with this field next to the enrollment?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just touch on it a little bit then, and then we can jump into it when we do the actual enrollment. Let me just get to that's the SSVF employment question. Okay. Well, housing move-in date versus project start date. I'll just review it this way, and then we can talk about it a little bit later. So housing move-in date and project start. Housing move-in date is the date that the client physically occupies the unit. Project start date is the date they become eligible and have accepted services in your project. They could be the same day. They don't have to be. It's just that housing move-in date has to be a date equal to or greater than your project start date, okay? And that's the key, really, when you're talking about project start versus housing move-in. And for the PSH projects, rapid rehousing, SSVF, you have the one-time field data element. If you click on it for any enrollment, you're given a housing move-in date option. I want to do SSVF though. We'll jump into an SSVF enrollment right now, and then we're going to, so we can talk about that one-time field with SSVF and then the SSVF employment question. All right. So I'm going to go through an enrollment. You all can certainly do so as well, or you can just watch me do one up here, and ask me any questions as I go along. So I'm going to add these individuals. I'm not going to add the grandparent, but just the adult and child. I'm going to add them to my SSVF project under restart. Okay. So one thing, let me just back up a step. because I want to point this out as well, because I've seen this happen. When you're adding somebody to your project, you don't go by add new at the top right. You go to add client HMIS intake, okay? And then you do your normal search. Always start with the head of household, first and last name search. Check for duplicates. All right, now your client, for the most part, should show up, unless you're doing outreach. If you're an outreach project, it's very likely that the client might not be in the system because they've never been outreached before. So you may actually have to say this is a new client. But for the most part, SSVF, rapid rehousing, homeless prevention, maybe not, because they may have never been in the system. This might be their first experience of almost being homeless, so it's very possible that they might not have an HMIS history. But SSVF and rapid rehousing most likely will, and you should see them come up in the search list. Make sure you identify and click on that client. Never say this is a new client if your client is here. So I'm going to click on my client, and it'll populate all the existing demographics on my particular client. You can evaluate it, make sure it's correct. You do have to verify address. If they are street homeless, you have to try to get as close to it. If they're staying at a shelter, you can use that. If there's a drop-in center, you can use that. Otherwise, if there's a particular place where they tend to be, you can use that, and then verify address. And then click on the actual address when it comes up. And then the other thing you want to make sure you do, especially in Google Chrome, is always maximize your window, because that will bring the save and cancel values up for you to see. Once you're comfortable with the data the way it looks, you're going to hit save. All right, now, this is the add family member screen. If you have a family member that is not listed here and you want them to be available for enrollment, you have to add them here by clicking add row. If everybody is here that you would expect to see, then you're fine, you do nothing. If there's somebody here that you're not going to enroll, and you don't need to do anything with them. This is just telling you who the system has found as being associated with the person that you're enrolling. It doesn't mean that they're being enrolled in your program. It just means that, hey, by the way, this client has also been enrolled with this client and this client. Somewhere along the way, they're a family. It's only just making those people available to you for enrollment. Okay, so again, if there's another child that should be here, you would just click add row, provide the data, first and last name, check for duplicates, locate the client, click on them, it'll populate the data, and you'll be all set. If this list is fine, then all you have to do is hit save. You're not removing anything from that screen. Your program enrollment screen, family name will default. Project start date, I'll do 08, 01 to 018, just to give me a little bit of room. And project exit date, you never provide an exit date, you just click in the box. This will default to a date that the system reads as equaling to open. 12/31/9999 equals an open record in case-worthy language. All right. Project, this is where you actually add them to your project. So you would click on the project drop-down and then go down to whichever project you want to add them. I want to add them to SSVF, so hopefully the SSVF name is here. Yeah, so I'll add them to one of the SSVF projects. I'll do a rapid rehousing one. All right. Okay. So we're having our SSVF enrollment, and you can see the provider defaults. There's nothing else you need to do here. You don't have accounts associated with your projects, anything like that. Okay. Then you just hit save at the bottom right. The next screen is the screen that adds the other members to the enrollment, okay? So in this case, I'm just saying that this child is the only one that should be included. Make sure you change the start date. Because you're enrolling them at the same time as the parent, you would expect that that would be true, that the enrollment start date's the same. You can click on the star here to default that to open. Check the relation to head of household, self and child, that's correct. Again, as you can see, even though this grandparent is part of the household, they're not enrolling with these two members of the household, so I'm not checking them, I'm leaving them unchecked. And then I'm gonna hit save. Now the system is only going to give me the assessment questions for the 2 members that I've checked off. All right. And now it is going to ask me if I want to copy. You can certainly copy assessments. It does make the process a little quicker. It's going to hit yes and then done. I'm only going to copy for the head of household though, because for my test client, I know that there's complete head of household data. And then I'm going to hit the magnifying glass and search. All right, so here I'm going to pick the newest entry assessment from the list because it's probably the best one. It probably has the most relevant data. I'm going to click that and hit select. And then I'm going to hit copy assessment. Now, that's going to pull in any entry data that the system finds that is that's in alignment with the entry that I'm doing. So the first thing you have to worry about when you copy data for an entry is where it finds for client location, because it's going to give you the previous client location. So you are always going to have to change that. All right, so I'm going to change that to the restart location for where I'm enrolling this client. And then restart SSVF, I'm going to change that. Now I can look at the data. Disabling condition, that's correct. All this other information is correct, so I'm not going to change it. If it were different, I would just simply edit it by clicking the drop down and changing the response. But for this matter, I'm going to say it's correct, and I'm going to hit save. Now it's going to bring me to the child's record for the HUD Universal Assessment. And you can keep track up on the top left. The top left always tells you which client's record you're in. So now I'm in the child's record, you can see up top here. Before I was in the head of household's record. And as you can see, it's only showing me the question for disabling condition because the child is under the age of 18. I'm going to say no to disable. If the child were over 18 or 18 and over, I would see chronic homelessness and hit save. Now it's going to bring me to the HUD program assessment for the adult. You can follow along up top. It's going to populate any data that's relevant in the system. Now, non-cash benefit, that's an across the system question. Covered by health insurance, across the system question. Last grade completed is SSVF specific. Connection with SOAR, this person may have had a PATH enrollment, something along there, because PATH always also asks for SOAR data. Employment, that is specific to SSVF for the HUD program assessment. Financial assessment has an employment section, but it's not part of the HUD program assessment, so that's why it's here and it's blank, because this client's never been enrolled in an SSVF project. And again, the SSVF specific questions are blank as well, because this client's last enrollment was not an SSVF enrollment. So depending on where the client was will depend on how relatable the data is going to be to your enrollment. So you are going to have to do some work. Non-cash benefits, yes. Benefit types, I'm going to say, are the nutritional and supplemental. I'm going to leave those as they are. Last grade completed, I'll complete that. Everything else covered by health insurance is the same. SOAR is the same. Employed. Now, these were the new questions that went live April 30th. Is everybody familiar with all the couple of SSVF users out there? Are you familiar with these questions related to employment?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you backdated and gone into clients who existed in your project prior to April 30th? Have you gone in and answered those questions for anybody who was still enrolled?
No.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, that'll be a requirement. It should have been, the June repository should have been set up to notify you of anybody missing these questions. That might not be the case yet, but you will have to go into any record that where the client was still enrolled as of April 30th. You'll have to go in there and provide the employment information at the entry assessment. All right, so I'm going to say yes, and I'll just say full-time.
I do have a question real quick while you're on the screen and made me think about it.
Yep.
So if we have a client enrolled, they weren't receiving food stamps at the time, but that is one thing that they now do receive. How do we go back in to find this screen to put that in?
I'll show you that as soon as I'm done, because that would be in the assessments dashboards.
That is a problem that my team is having. Overall assessments, we've got that, putting them together, but like once I run the APR, I find the errors. Going back to the specific screens, like right here, all of that won't come back up. That is our struggle.
Yeah, I'll show you. It's we looked at those already. Remember when we were looking at data congruence, and I went into the entry assessment for HUD Universal, the entry assessment for HUD program, looked on disabled, yes, no, looked at the disability types and all that. All that is available to you to edit at your will whenever you need to. Okay, so we'll go back to that as soon as I'm done with the enrollment. All right, so the other thing that's important to note, let's say as you're completing this employment data, you realize, wait a minute, this person isn't employed full-time, they're actually not employed, and you change this to no, all right? And then you change to why not employed, looking for work. The problem you've just created is that you've just put essentially phantom data you've left in the system. If you need to back out data that has qualifying questions, you must remove the qualifying question response first. So if I realize this should be no up here, I first have to change this back to nothing, then I can change that to no. All right? If I leave this yes and this full-time and say, oh, wait a minute, this should be no, I've just left that full-time response in the background. And that can cause problems for data. So make sure that if you have to change a response when you're entering data, that you clear the qualifying question and then go back to the primary question, okay? All right, so this client is employed full-time, we'll say percent A of AMI, we'll say that they're less than 30%. VAMAC, you only have one option, it pre-populates for you there. Last permanent address data quality, you can say full if you, and then the zip code you'll need. Somebody want to give me oh, actually it's giving me the current, all right. So it's giving you the current address, I'll click that. And then HIV status will leave as no, and then hit save. So you've completed the entry assessment for HUD program for the adult. Now the HUD program for the child is going to come up. Okay, so here we are on the child record. The only questions that get asked are health insurance and HIV status for the child, because disabling condition is a condition that gets tracked for children. And then I'm going to hit save. Now we're going to come to the next assessment for the adult. As you can see up here, it's the financial assessment. The only thing you'll have to make sure you edit is the AMI table here, which is wherever the AMI is looking, where it's measuring the area median income. If the person has income is yes, then all you have to do is click the checkbox to activate the income and then hit save. All right, if the income were different, you could certainly edit it. You wouldn't have to keep it the same. Now I'm at the child record, okay? We don't assess income on people under the age of 18. You do have to fill in the AMI value. You change the income from any source to no, and then you save no income, okay? All right, now you're at the health insurance assessment for the adult. It's going to default to whatever you copied. So we copied over data and it's yes, and that's true. So I'm just going to save that. For the child record, I didn't copy over any data, so I just have to make sure I update that with the state, in this case, the state health insurance value for the child. I'm going to change to yes, and I'm going to hit save. Okay. This is the reservation screen. You don't have to, you're not required for, if you do this at your agency, it's fine, but the reservations are tended to be used for the emergency shelter programs. If you do put people into a bed at your agency, this is where you would do it. Does anybody do that for their SSVF, rapid rehousing, or homeless prevention?
No.
No, okay. So if you come to this screen, you just hit done in the bottom right, because you don't have to do anything to it. So the next one is going to be the veteran assessment screen. If you're SSVF, obviously the expectation would be that this is a veteran. If this is clear, it means there's no veteran data. If it's green, it means there's veteran data. And either way, you want to click on add veteran or edit veteran info to either make sure it's still accurate or to actually put the data in. In this case, this client has veteran data history and everything is up to date. The person did not participate in any theaters of operation, so I'm not going to change that. You're only responsible for the required questions. If you have the other data, feel free to put it in, and then you can hit save and move forward. All right. Then you're going to come to, once you've done that and updated, all you have to do is hit done in the bottom right. Okay, now it's the services spreadsheet. As you can see, my project name has defaulted to the enrollment that I'm currently working on, and that's this SSVF enrollment. If I hit search in the top right here, it's going to bring me or show me all the services that are associated with SSVF. Now, you can certainly add the service here if a service has been provided and you want to capture it. If no service has been provided yet, let me update that. If no service has been provided yet, you don't have to do anything on this screen, okay? You can just hit save and move forward. And I'm actually going to do that because right now we're just doing the enrollment. And at a later date, we're going to come in and provide the service. Next is the case note screen. You can add a case note. If you're at your agency, you do that. If you add a note to every enrollment. Does anybody add case notes to every enrollment, or is that something you don't do?
Yes, we do.
Okay. So you can add a note here by clicking Add New in the top right. And provide the date. Now, it's going to default to today's date, but my client's enrollment date was actually 8/1/2018, so I'm going to change that. Template. You'll never use template. Template is very specific. These are custom templates that people have added to Caseworthy, and that's what you're seeing. All right. If you click on one of these templates, it's going to bring you information that's got nothing to do with your agency. Okay. So leave template blank. It's not required. All you have to do is put in the summary, so test, and then select the type of note that this is. And I can just say I can pick from, a slew of note options. So you can pick one. Let's see. This is case note. So you can just put in case note if you want to be generic. And then test note. And then you're done. If it's an individual, you can leave it as individual. If it's a family, you can change it to family. Okay? You can add a signature if you prefer. You don't have to. And then hit save. And that'll store that case note that you just made for that client. Okay? Once you're done with that, you hit done. And then you'll move on to the next screen, which is essentially done. And hit done one more time. And that'll bring you out to the top level where you can go look at your client's enrollment by clicking on project enrollment. All right. So now you'll see that this person has a restart SSVF enrollment starting on 8/1/2018. Okay. Now we'll go look. That's the head of household. Now we're going to go look at the child. Does the child have an enrollment attached to their record? And we're going to go see. And they do. They have a restart enrollment here starting on 8/1/2018. Again, this is the household enrollment. So we'll go back to the head of household. Now we have a service we want to provide for this client. So you can add a service here from the dashboard. You can just click on services. And this will bring you to the services screen where you can create a service. I'm going to add new in the top right. Okay. And now you have to make sure that you pick your project. All right. Because you want to pick the project that you've enrolled the client into, and it should default to the project associated with your enrollment. I'm going to select that. Let the status bar update. Okay, and it'll populate the services associated with your SSVF project, and I'm just going to call it a case management service. I'll change my my number of units depending on, I'll say it was a 30-minute conversation, and it was on 8/1. If I want, and then I'll hit save. Okay. Let that update. Okay, so it'll show you as soon as it updates. Second, it's going to show you that restart and case note on 8/1 for case management. The unit of time in this case is you can make it whatever you want. It's just you just have to decide at your agency are you doing 15-minute increments, 30-minute increments, so on and so forth. If this were a financial transaction where you help the person get rental assistance, then you can click the drop down, click your project, let the screen update. And then you could say if you have rental deposit, rent arrears, you have utility assistance. So you have a couple of options here. So we're going to call it rent. Rental deposit would be security deposit. Rental arrears would obviously be back rent. In this case, we're going to just say rent. And we'll leave it as 9/4 because we'll say it's the September rent. Now, this one you're going to want to put in the value of units column, and we'll say it's $500. Leave this as number of units as 1, value of units as the amount, and it'll default to dollars, and you can see it shows $500 there in the far right, and then hit save. Okay, so that'll show that this client got a $500 rental assistance, for the month of September. As soon as the screen updates, you'll see it here. September 9/4, the $500 rent. Right. So that's the SSPF. If you're HP, it would be the same thing. You have a services assigned to your HP enrollment. You would click on services for your HP client and select whichever HP service you provided, utility assistance, rent arrears, security, whatever it might be. If you're rapid rehousing, again, same thing. Okay, so that's the enrollment. Now, we had questions about editing data. So let's talk about a real example. So you ran an APR, and what is it that you were trying to fix that the APR said was a problem?
Let's say entry, assessment, money. I can't think of it. Like, let's just say it had to do with some entry, the money, like
okay.
something.
So a financial. So the like
financial.
the entry on table Q16, it's telling you that a client is missing an entry assessment for income.
And then the cash benefit,
Okay. Yeah, so let's do this. Let's do. Yep. Let's get some info on the screen that is helpful. Now I'm just going to run a generic APR. It's not. We're not going to mess with the actual data. I'm just going to use it as reference so you would see where you would fix something that were wrong on the particular screen. So if I go to page 7, yeah, page 7 is the cash income table. So let's say you had either a data not collected, or we'll go with client doesn't know or data not collected. One of those two we're showing as an issue at entry for a particular client. But if it is income at start, then the system is looking at the entry assessment for a particular client record. And let's say that you found in the detail export, and when I talk about detail export, let me give you a sample detail. When we talk about income, does everybody know how to get the detail data out of a report in Caseworthy?
Yes.
Okay, so any report where you see client detail subreport, you just click on that and it'll give you the clients associated with that particular report. Oops, let me move that out of the way. Okay, and this is what it looks like. It comes out like this when you export it to Excel. All right. So we have a client with an income issue. We want to go over to the income column and discover who could be causing that problem. And I'm just going to pull up a client refused one, okay? So this client, for example, has client refused at entry for income. Once you isolate that, you just have to go to that client ID number, and we're going to pretend that the client we're going to is that person. And you don't have to close the report. All you have to do is go back to HMIS, click the briefcase, and it'll bring you back to the report, back to the client records. And let's say you went and you found that client by clicking Find Client, putting in their client ID, and now we're in that client's record. And we need to fix their entry assessment because it's saying client refused. So you would click Assessments, HUD Assessments Dashboard, and then when the dashboard opens, you would go to Financial Assessment, and you would look for the entry assessment. We're going to say it's this one. Click here, and then click Edit. You can now change anything on this screen, and let's say that this client's response was client doesn't know. Okay, so let's say that's what we saw. All you would have to do is, if you knew the actual amount, you would have to say change that to yes, and then click on this table here on one of the options, and let's say it's SSI, put in the dollar amount, resave the assessment, and you've now just changed it from client doesn't know, put in an income amount, resaved, and then when you go back to the report, you just have to click refresh, and that will refresh the report with the new data, and you can see if what you did just removed that client with missing data and now shows it as valid data. Okay? And that's essentially how you would edit an entry assessment. And that goes for any issue, whether it's health insurance, non-cash benefits. If it's saying it's something that happened at entry, oops. So for example, non-cash benefits, if you have data not collected like this, benefits at start, that's looking at an entry assessment. If it's something that's latest annual, that's looking for an annual assessment. Now, if you're running the APR and you're showing missing values at annual, you have to first think about your project. Do you generally serve people for more than 12 months? And does your project type require an annual assessment? Well, rapid rehousing, if you're serving the client for more than 12 months, fine, but unless it's a HUD-funded rapid rehousing and you're only submitting a CAPER, the CAPER doesn't assess annual data. The HUD APR does. Homeless prevention, generally you're not serving a person more than 12 months, so you're not going to have annual data. You're exiting clients once you're done providing the service, and in general that's happening in 12 months or less. SSVF, along the same lines, you could be serving a person more than 12 months, but the repository, you have to think, okay, when I do my repository upload, are they looking for annual assessment data? The HUD APR will. So this is something to keep in mind if you're seeing something in the annual assessment column, okay? Otherwise, you're really just focused on benefit at start and then benefit at exit, or whatever the category is. If you've got a client who's exited the project and you're seeing missing information, then you would edit an exit assessment if there were one. Same deal, just click the gear, click edit, and you can do whatever you want to that particular record. Now, if you open up, yeah, go ahead.
Can you go back to the assessment portion and show which little, I don't know the word, yeah, open that. Which one of those, which one of those has the non-cash?
Yeah, non-cash, okay. So HUD Universal is disabled, yes, no, and chronic homeless assessment. HUD program is DV, non-cash, health insurance, disabling condition. For SSVF, it also has education, AMI, and then the HIV status questions as well. So for HUD, yeah, so HUD program would have the non-cash benefit assessment data.
Perfect, thank you.
Yep. So if you click that and then go in as soon as it gets there. There we go. And you can see non-cash benefits are here. Now, because you all are still dealing with some converted data, there could be some things that are happening that you cannot fix. One, you come in here and you look for your restart assessment at entry and you don't see it. Let's say that says during, all right? Send in an email saying, hey, I don't have a restart entry assessment for my SSVF project in the HUD program summary for client ID 641648. You can fix that, but there might be something else going on, like a deleted enrollment, and the assessment you create manually might not be tied to the enrollment that's currently active. So some screwy things can happen. So just make sure you're editing an entry assessment and there is one obviously present.
That goes for rapid rehousing as well?
That's any project type. You could have that circumstance on converted data.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Any other questions about after you've done an enrollment and you need to edit something? No? Okay. So how many of you have done annual assessments or need to do annual assessments?
All of CSL has done assessments.
Has done annuals?
90 days.
90 days or 30 days.
Yeah. So I'm not referring to those. I'm referring to an annual assessment, which is generally a HUD requirement for the APR. Yeah, the SSVF, you have your research that you have to do. But for the most part, I don't think any of you else out there would have to really worry about that. Homeless prevention, you're running a CAPER. So again, that doesn't require an annual assessment. and the HP homeless prevention and enrollment will capture all of the enrollment data you need. Then you have your services that are specific. Again, it's usually rent arrear, utilities, things like that. Okay. All right. So let's talk about, we can talk about exiting a household if people want to see that.
I have another question, sorry.
Sure. That's okay, go ahead.
So say we have a client that does not have food stamps on entry into the program.
Okay.
Then while they're in the program, the case manager assists them with getting hooked up with those benefits.
Yeah.
Do we just edit the entry assessment and add that, or do we have to create a new assessment to show that that's something that we assisted with?
Yeah. So you have two choices there. One, depending on the proximity of when it happened or was discovered. So for example, let's say on August 1st, 2018, the person had applied for food stamps and they get it August 5th. Well, do you really want to create a whole new assessment for something that happened 4 days after entry? Probably not. You would probably just edit the entry assessment. But if it's something that happened a month, 2 months, 3 months after entry, then you would create a during program assessment that would capture that non-cash benefit. So to do that, you're going to go to the, let me back out because I might have gone a little bit quick. So let's go back to the case management screen, project enrollment. So, all right, so you go in and find your client that you just got food stamps for. You go to find client, you put in the client ID number, brings up their record. Number one, always make sure you're in the head of household record, okay? Once you're confirmed that you're in the head of household record, you can go to the HUD assessments from here, or you can go HUD assessments from the left side menu here. It doesn't matter, it's your choice. HUD assessment brings you to the same place. HUD assessments dashboard. Now, it's a non-cash benefit. Those are in HUD program, so I'm going to click HUD program. You have a couple of choices when it comes to a during program assessment. If all you did was essentially get the person the food stamps, you can do it manually this way and add new, and then click no assessment selected, right? Then add assessments or add new, and it'll open up the add new screen. And you can click the enrollment because you always have to assign an enrollment. So you have to pick the one that's associated with your agency, all right? Mm-hmm. Then assessment type is going to be during. We'll leave today's date, hit save, and this will open up the assessment for the adult head of household and anything that would fall into the purview of a during program assessment for that particular project type. Non-cash benefit. Go ahead.
Can't you copy an assessment and just edit the?
You can. You certainly can do that. There's just not a lot of relatable data on a during program from during entry to during. The entry's got quite a bit, where the during only has a couple of questions. So you certainly could. But in this case, I'm just going to say yes, and then you got SNAP, and this is still the same. This is still, or let me say this is no, and then this is still no. So that's one way you could do it. Now, if you do on a regular basis, if you do assessments, then you have two choices as well. So let's say if you're SSVF and you do a 30, 60, 90 day like research, for example. Well, if that's the case, you may want to go here, and do you have that? Oh, you don't have, oh yeah, you do. New during program assessment, okay? This will give you the full assessment workflow for a during program update on a client, all right? So that's where you have to decide where each agency might be a little bit different. If you're SSBF, you're probably doing a regular research, which you should be, I'm guessing, unless you guys do research a different way, that you go to. Okay, how do you go here?
No, I'm looking forward to seeing what you're going to do. We've not done this.
Oh, okay. All right. So, yeah, well, if you're going to...
What I've been doing for my research is just typing up a case note saying that I've completed the recertification process. I didn't know that you could do during assessment.
Well, let's put it this way: that's one way you can get updated data to follow or match your research. It doesn't report necessarily it's not going to report as quote unquote a recert. So if you're doing a recertification and you want to reflect the update in the system, you could come here, click enrolled, and click new during program assessment on the date that you do your recertification.
Okay, good.
So that's an option you have to show the status of the client's data at that recert time frame.
Perfect.
Okay. Now, the other thing for like rapid rehousing, homeless prevention, if something changed midstream, you just have to decide at your agency, am I going to do a full new during program assessment because the client's non-cash benefit changed? Well, you may want to. If it's, 3 months after your involvement with them, you may say, you know what, non-cash change, let's just make sure everything's up to date. Because the system for certain categories will look at the latest assessment for like the CAPER. It'll look at, in some parts of the APR, it looks at latest assessment versus annual assessment. But ultimately, if you're going to update data, you can use the new during program assessment workflow, which will just give you, it'll launch a workflow, which then shows you all the questions that are available to answer. And you can also copy here as well. You can say, yes, you can copy the entry data, and then you just kind of move through the screens, and you have to edit where you need to edit. Okay.
Okay.
I won't go through the whole thing because you obviously have seen what answering assessment questions looks like. All right.
That was your That was your compliment. Thanks for that information.
Sure. Yeah, and again, just remember that a during program assessment does not get called, it's not labeled research, but it can be in concert with your paper file on the recertification.
And that's just another way to do it, as opposed to like going to the HUD assessments. And, I mean, right?
Yeah, it is another way to do it that it's a little quicker to go through the assessment tool than it is to go into each assessment and update.
I agree.
All right.
So if you do the during, the other way you did it, it takes you through each assessment.
Yep. Yeah, it'll show you the HUD Universal, HUD Program, HUD Health, and HUD Financial for that particular client. And it's an abbreviated assessment because it doesn't ask all the same questions that you get at entry.
Okay.
All right. So let's exit our client. So clicking the gear, complete exit assessment. You have two options out actually in Kansas City. One is complete exit assessment here. The other is exit enrollment with reservation. Now, exit enrollment with reservation, I guess let me ask, those of you who have done exits, what has been your process for exiting an individual or family?
With reservation.
With reservation.
With reservation, okay. It's fine either way. The only difference being is the with reservation brings up the bed list exit, which if you're not using a bed list, you can pretty much, you don't really have anything to do with this screen. This is that exit family reservation screen. If you were using a bed list, you would have some more information here and you would have to put an end date. So that's the only thing that can be a little bit confusing about using that exit, but that's still fine. And then you just hit save. And you'll move through the exit. You'll get all the questions. You can certainly copy. So I'll say yes, and I'll bring in the assessments. I'll use my entry. Be careful here because now you have a during and an entry. A during is incomplete. It's only going to show you certain things. So go with the entry if it's there because that's going to have more information. The during is useful for like what the client had last time, but you're probably going to have an exit sheet in front of you that has the actual data on the client. And then I'm going to click that and I'll grab the entry for that client. And then I'm going to copy all the assessments. And then just let it catch up. So HUD Universal, there's nothing that gets assessed at exit for the HUD Universal assessment. HUD Universal assessment is just asking about client location. It's asking about disabled, yes, no, and then chronic homeless evaluation. All of that is assessed at entry. So all you have to do is hit save past this screen. Okay, now I'm on the child record and same thing, save. All right. Now HUD program is where you're going to get some questions. Obviously destination isn't asked at entry, so you're going to have to supply this answer. And it's most important that you supply an answer that is equal to or greater than the level of housing that the person's currently in. You don't want to say emergency shelter if they're coming out of SSVF, homeless prevention, or rapid rehousing. So just make sure you put in, or well, when at all possible, that the client is exiting to a positive exit. And then update anything here that has changed. And we're going to say everything's the same and hit save. For the child record, you're just going to have to supply the exit destination and obviously confirm insurance and HIV status. In this case, we're going to say they went along with the parent, so their exit destination was the same, and then save. All right. The financial assessment, we're going to say everything is the same, so I just have to click the checkbox to activate it. If I don't click that and I try to hit save, I'm going to get an error, so you do have to activate the assessment. We'll say the income stayed the same. If it changed, all you would have to do is edit it here, and then I'll hit save. And the child record, you're going to leave as no and save no income. And insurance, we're going to say there's no change there. Hit save. And then the health insurance for the child is going to be the same, and hit save. Okay, now you've exited. So you have a start, the begin date of 8/1. Check your exit date. Make sure it's the date you expect it to be, because it's going to fault to today's date. And I'm going to hit save. All right, and you're done. Click done. Now you'll go back and see your client record. You'll see that the enrollment is now identified as exited. This will be for both the child and the parent. If you go look at the member enrollment, you'll see it here as well. That for this particular enrollment, there's a start and end date attached to both of their member records. Okay, now let's talk about something that is helpful. You've exited a client, and then you realize you needed to do more services on that client. Well, if you go to the services screen and you try to add a new service to an exited client, you can't do that. Nothing will pop up in the enrollment field or the project field, which is looking for an open enrollment. All you have to do is go back to the project enrollment, click exited, and yeah, there it is, and click reopen enrollment. This will reopen the enrollment for the household, and then you can go back and do those services, and then you can re-exit the client. And the nice thing is all the exit data will be recalled. You don't have to re-enter it. You're just going to have to save through each screen. But all the stuff you put in at exit will still be there. Okay. So that is one of the really nice things about Caseworthy, that everything you touch is not written in stone. You can virtually change just about everything. And that's also one of the challenges of Caseworthy. You end up having a lot of chefs. You have a lot of people changing the recipe. So it's important that you have some strict guidelines with your users about what to do if there's something that needs to be changed. And if you're not sure what to do, and if they're not sure what to do, you're always better off sending in an email saying, hey, we think we need help changing this particular record. But once you get the hang of it, it's not bad at all, and it's kind of nice when you can edit things and fix things without having to bring in somebody from the outside for assistance. Okay. All right, so that's that for, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about before I forget. Let me get back into here. SSVF. So I did want to talk about the one-time field after we created our SSVF enrollment. So the one-time field for SSVF, if you click on it, you have housing move-in date. For rapid rehousing, you have, again, housing move-in date. All right. So it's important that those fields get filled out because they are evaluated against the project start date. Project start date is the date that the person was approved for the project. Housing move-in date is the date they physically occupied the unit. It's just collected in the head of household enrollment, this top level enrollment. You don't have to do it for the child as well. So housing move-in date, make sure you're going back and filling that out so you can capture. What HUD is looking for is what is the space of time between when they're approved to when they actually occupy the unit. It could be the same day, that's fine, but they are trying to capture that just to make sure that the time frame and the window is as small as possible.
Is there a report that I can go in to just find out all of my residential move-in dates just to see them?
Unfortunately, no. What you can look at, though, which might give you some ideas, the APR will have, it's got a timeliness evaluation, which looks at the project start date versus the date the person was physically added to HMIS. So that will give you a window of time of how long it's taking staff to get the data in the system. Let's look. I believe, actually, now that I say that, there is the rapid rehousing table, which is actually looking at that now that I say it out loud. We got it here. It's actually here. Let's see, it is this last one? Yeah, here it is. So the rapid rehousing table, it's Q22C, length of time between project entry and residential move-in date. So I didn't run this on a rapid rehousing project, so that's why you're not seeing it. But if this were a rapid rehousing project, it would have data here telling you how many days between the, it would give you a count of, so if this said like 50, that would be 50 households without children had a housing move-in date 7 days or less than, 7 days, the project start date to housing move-in date was a 7-day period. Okay, if they came in within 8 to 14 days, they would be here. So 8 to 14 day, they fall in that 8 to 14 day gap between project start and housing move-in. Okay, so this table would give you that information. And let me just check the detail, because I don't know if the detail's been updated with that. Let's see, does it give us a housing move-in date evaluation? Yeah, you have a move-in date to length of move-in date. So for the detail report, you will get the last 2 columns of the report will show you the move-in date and then the length of time. So you can actually see the client record, and you could specifically talk to a case manager and say, hey, you know, the housing move-in date is September 4th, program enrollment date, which would be back here, enrollment begin, by it. Enrollment begin date is July 26th. So hopefully you wouldn't have that circumstance. But, so you can see the enrollment begin date, you can see the housing move-in date, and then you actually get the length of time begin date to move-in date here. So that would help you assess what that window of time looks like. The other place you can look at that, where you can look at the next sort of level that HUD is going to, is in this hyperlink, Q5, Q6. There's the timeliness table. And the timeliness table is looking at the amount of time from when the client's project start date is versus the effective date in HMIS. The effective date is the date they were added to the system. So if their project start date is 8/1/2018, but the date they were actually added to HMIS is 9/4/2018, obviously you're looking at about a 30-day window, and HUD gives you a little bit of an indicator on how much they're going to squeeze that, because the sort of practice table that's been added to the APR only goes up to 11 plus days. So you can be pretty sure that anything beyond 11 days at some time in the near future is going to be considered less than positive, or you know, less than a favorable time frame. So keep that in mind as well, because that is from the date the person was actually added to HMIS versus the project start date that the staff give the client. All right. So homeless prevention, the only other thing to talk about that's somewhat unique to homeless prevention is the living situation the night prior to project entry. You want to make sure that that's a non-homeless scenario. That shouldn't be emergency shelter. If they're homeless prevention, you're trying to prevent them from entering homelessness. So that would most likely be that they're in an apartment, they're in a rental situation of some sort, and they need a short-term intervention to help them maintain the house. And other than that, SSVF sounds like most of you are pretty familiar with the required services there. And then reporting, we talked about the CAPER. We did actually, here it is right here. I did have the slide on it. Length of time between project entry and residential move-in is Q22C on the APR and on the CAPER. Okay, so you will see that evaluated on the CAPER. Repository upload. So I can talk about those two if people want to, or if there's some other question that you have on a general sense for enrollment. We can go look at services reports as well. Is there anything else on the sort of client management side that people want to see?
No, it's been very informative, I will say, for CSL.
Okay, that's good. All right, so let's just dive into reports a little bit deeper. Okay, so for rapid rehousing and homeless prevention, at some point for homeless prevention, you'll probably have a CAPER upload, I'm guessing, where people are going to be uploading to Sage. Has anybody there uploaded to Sage yet for a funder report?
Yes, I have.
Oh,
Melody,
that's good. Okay. So
I've only done it once, but it was very easy.
Yeah, it's a nice process. It's much better than eSnaps was. So thankfully, you don't have to go through that nightmare anymore. And it's obviously better than the paper submission days, for those of you who recall those. I do, and I much rather do it this way than make 7 copies of every page of the report I need to submit to HUD. So for the Sage upload, for those of you who haven't done it yet, Sage is the new system that HUD has employed via Apt Associates. Apt Associates are the consultants that manage Sage, and it's the repository, as you can think of it, for your APRs and CAPERs. You have to obtain a login, and this is something, Sage is something that is, hold on for 1 second. Okay, Sage is something that neither Mark nor Nutmeg or any other system admin has access to, other than doing a test upload. We don't get logins. We're not grantees. So if you have a problem with how your project is set up in Sage, you actually have to go through the Sage help desk to get assistance with that. And that would just be, if you don't have an account, you just create an account, and then once you have an account, there's links to support. So for those of you who do have access to Sage, you can always do your uploads there. And those who don't, and if you have access to Sage, either way, I recommend that when you're evaluating your APR or your CAPER at your agency, that you also do a sample upload. Do the sample upload, it's no different than the normal upload. You just click on the sample upload link, select the report you want to upload, and then follow the instructions. Choose the file. You have to choose the file first, then identify yourself as an organic human being, or an organic being in this case, and not a robot. And so make sure you do that step second before you want to choose that file first. If you try to do the determine yourself as not a robot first, and then the file upload, the upload and test won't work. So make sure you choose the file first and then identify as not a robot, and you'll be fine. And what's nice about it, you've evaluated your APR at the HMIS level. You can now do a test submission. It'll go through all the same validations. It'll tell you if it sees a problem. You can identify the problem, and then you can fix it and do another test upload. And that way you're ready. When it's finally time to do a CAPER upload or an APR upload to Sage, you're pretty confident that the data is clean. Okay. For those of you who haven't done a Sage upload yet, it's important to understand that the Sage upload is a CSV export. Okay, so let's just look at a CAPER, for example, and we'll put in a test CAPER. All right, so you fill out your form, And did everybody see what I just did with my saved parameters?
Mm-hmm.
Does everybody know how to save your report parameters so you only have to enter them once and then you can just recall them?
Yes.
Okay, good. Great feature, especially if you're responsible for updating reports. And so is the the refresh feature. This feature, you'll never have to close a report once you run it. You just hit refresh and it refreshes your screen and you can immediately see if your edit fixed what you hoped it would fix. Okay, so two real important notes on report evaluation. Okay, so if I have to do an upload, a Caper upload, you have to use the Caper CSV export. If you just click report, that's fine. That'll give you a report to evaluate. It'll give you something that looks like this to evaluate and review. But that is not in the acceptable format for uploading to Sage. You would actually fill out the report form and then click Caper CSV export. You get this scary red box shows up. All that's telling you is that your report will be ready in about 10 to 20 minutes, okay? Now, to go see your report, you do have to change your role. I'll change mine to system admin. And you can then go back to the wrench, and then it's in administration, and then it's in batch file exports. Okay, so there's something important to note here. If you come here to look for your report and file name is blank, that's just telling you that your report is not ready yet. You cannot export until the file name populates, okay? That's really important. If you try to do that and I try to download file, I'm not going to get any data. This file will be blank, so don't waste your time doing it. Wait until that populates. Once it populates, though, all you have to do is click the gear, click download file, and select where you want to save it. You can rename it if you prefer, but it's going to save a zipped file, and I'll show you what a zipped file looks like. A zip file, I did have one. I don't think it's here though. I might have, yeah. So a zip file looks something like this here on the outside that you see, okay? And that has folders in it. Let me just get that to open like this. This is an APR zipped file. And each one of these is essentially a table off the APR, okay? And the nice thing about the error message that you'll get from Sage, for example, it'll say, there's a problem with Q7B, and it'll tell you somewhat cryptically what the problem is, but it'll at least give you an idea of where to go look, okay? And then if you do have a problem, just email, send an email to either Mark or Nutmeg or both and say, hey, I got a Sage error that there's something wrong with table Q8B, Q7B, whatever table it finds, and we can help you assess them, okay? All right. Here. For SSVF projects, you're doing a repository upload. So you have to actually run, has everybody done a repository? I thought somebody said they've done it already, your repository uploads. Has anybody done?
Supervisor does them.
Okay, so for SSVF, those are actually here under this CSV 6.1 export. You click this. Then you change, you have to identify the export, you change it to SSVF. If you have anything filtered there, you can call it up. You fill out the form, and then you export the CSV, and it'll go to the same place. You'll go to admin, and then the batch file export, and that's where you'll see it. And then whoever has repository access can upload. And again, Nutmeg nor Mark has access to the repository. That is the grantee location only. So if you get a repository error, we can't see the error in the repository. We can only see what you see, which is the error message that you receive. Now, the repository will give you some information on that error message. And let me go and grab one.
Hey, Jim, I'm gonna,
Yep.
I don't think there's any, I'm just trying to make sure we don't waste your time.
Yep.
I don't think there's anybody in this room that does this.
That so nobody evaluates the repository once it's been uploaded? Okay, that's fine.
Robin does, but she had to leave, so she's not here.
Okay, all right, not a problem. So if then you can pass on at your agency. If you have a repository upload error message, then that's something we can evaluate with you and help you resolve. Okay. All right. So that would take care of that topic. Annual assessments we talked about. Yeah. So everything else is APR for PH and TLP. Let's look at I know somebody had a question or had a comment about services, because all of you are collecting services data. So you have some options for evaluating the services that are being performed for your clients. You can go to the wrench, and then let me get out of system admin. So again, wrench, then reporting, and then operational reports. Okay, services by program is the one I prefer. It's not the only one here, but from my perspective, it's the most useful. So you click on services by program, and I should have I'll do a Salvation Army one now. So you want to set your date range, obviously. You can set your org and set your project. Let me get it. Okay. Leave services as all. Leave locations as all, regions, and report service categories. Leave those as all. So you're only going to provide information for the org and the project, and then start and end date. Okay. Then you're going to click report. And any service that's been provided on any client in that project type will be captured here. In this case, for this program, there's only bed night services. So that's all that's here. But if you had services for, I mean, you name it, if you had services for rent, if you had services for utilities, they'd all be listed out. They would have an export, so you could click on this link and it would take you to the client list, so you could see which clients received the service. If it's a service that carries a dollar amount with it, you would see a dollar amount here. If it's and then of course you see the breakdown, clients, families, adults, children here who are impacted by that service. So this is a top layer of what you would see, and the drill down for each category would be here, okay? If you run it on more than one project, then you would be able to flip screen by screen for each project. So, you know, project 1 would be this screen, project 2 would be the next screen, so on and so forth. But I just ran this on one project. And everything, as usual, can be exported to Excel or any other type format that you want.
Perfect. Great, thank you.
Yep. And you know, as you mess around with it, if it's not showing you what you think you would expect, again, just send in an email, and somebody can help you evaluate that services report.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about reports?
No. I think we're good.
Okay, that's good. All right. So I know some, I mean, that really covers everything that you would encounter with your project types. Is there, what I can do now is I can stop the recording, and then if people have something that's specific to their agency and they want to see it up on the screen and try to evaluate it, we can do that.
Okay.
Okay.